I'm Timothy Richardson. I'm a cinematographer. I'm a storyteller. I hail from the magical land of Orlando, Florida. I'm a Leo, so shout out to any Leos. Happy birthday to any Leos. I earned my master's degree in digital communication at Georgia State. Yeah, I've gone on to photograph feature films, documentaries, music videos, commercials. I'm not a teacher. So, this class it was really interesting when Jen asked me to do the class. I don't consider myself a teacher, but I do like to educate. Like I said, I'm more so a conversationalist that enjoys talking about the medium of storytelling. So I look forward to, conversing with you all about that. Before we dive into it, if we could, just a little interaction. If you could, in the chat, if you can just text what discipline you happen to study in, whether that's you're a director, you're aspiring photographer, cinematographer, costume design, sound design. I mean, the range, just to see what artists, what disciplines we have in here. I would love to see. That's right there. Okay. Nice. Writer, producer, director. Okay. I appreciate that, everyone. Appreciate the interaction. I asked this question because this class isn't specifically for an artist that is looking through the viewfinder or somebody just behind the camera. As I evolve as an image maker, you'll hear me say that a lot, image maker, visual artist, is that story is the core of everything. My images now, I focus more on what I'm pointing my camera at. If it's saying what it's supposed to be saying in that exact moment, right? To start off with, and because I feel like this is important to go into this conversation with, what is story? So if you would have asked me what is story, I would tell you my definition of story. Story is at the core of who we are. It's how we understand ourselves. It's how we understand the world around us. It's the people who raise us. It's the places we've been. It's our losses, our successes. It's our chosen community, right? And each of those experiences and people exist in an unfolding narrative in each of our lives. So you are the protagonist of your own film called Your Life, right? And the reason why I'm touching on story as a prerequisite is that without story, cinematography is just pretty images. Nice to look at, but they don't change you. They don't make you feel anything, right? So the philosophy of my work can be described as dynamic, expressive, and intimate. I aim to point my camera at the story and contribute my unique visual perspective, because we all have a unique visual perspective that I'll get into. I'm not a cameraman. I'm a visual artist, and I feel like it's important for all image makers, if you're behind the camera, specifically operating the camera, to know that you are brought on to a project to amplify this story through composition, through lighting, through movement, lens choice. I mean, there's just so many tools that a cinematographer has at his or her disposal to amplify a story. So I probably should show you my reel. So for those who aren't familiar with my work and those who are, I appreciate your support as I evolve as an artist. So I'm going to share my screen. Story is at the core of who we are, the people that raise us, places we travel, our chosen communities. These people and experiences exist in unfolding narrative in each of our lives. The moving image is a powerful and vital medium, capturing stories that unearth a universal human experience.
1095.
Yeah. So that is my cinematography reel. I think if you're a shooter, there's a lot of projects. It's kind of hard to kind of determine what you want on your reel. As you continue to evolve and re-edit them, you become more confident in what you're trying to say. So just going back to me being a conversationalist, I didn't, as far as a, strict syllabus, once again, I'm more of an educator. I like to talk about it and converse and share ideas. And especially because a lot of filmmaking is theoretical, so everybody sees it in their own unique perspective. And that's what always has made me curious about the medium. So what I decided to do was choose 3 cinematographers that I feel represent a certain element of cinematography. And I chose 3 cinematographers. And the first one I chose for color, this cinematographer, his name is Marcel Rev. He's actually the cinematographer for Euphoria, if anybody's familiar with the show on HBO. The second cinematographer that we're going to look at for composition, her name is Reed Morano. Really, really great cinematographer. And for lighting, we're going to be looking at and just conversing work from Bradford Young, cinematographer for Selma, Arrival. Yeah, and we're just going to, and I'll also talk about how these cinematographers influence my photography as well. If you noticed from my reel, I like a very naturalistic image, but expressive. I love using color, as Marcel Rev would say, as emotional expressionism. So let's just dive in a little bit and look at Marcel's work for color first. Great. So like I said, Marcel Rev, these are stills from Euphoria. I'm not sure if anybody has seen this show, but I think it's a great show. I love the story. I also just love the fact that Marcel Rev tells, like, his perspective comes from emotional expressionism. A lot of the times he uses color to explain what's happening emotionally as opposed to what's happening logically in the real world. So if you notice, a lot of his color is the way he lights is very painterly. We'll get into terms like Rembrandt, chiaroscuro lighting. He tends to really love cool temperatures mixed with warm temperatures. So a lot of this you can see warm temperature. He loves using tungsten. That's if you refer to it as tungsten, 32 Kelvin. And what I'll do is, and as I'm showing you that, I'll kind of even go to some of my own work. So this is Untraditional Films. This is the production company that I'm the CEO of. And something that I feel like I used color, and I'll say this was a short called Passing By that I shot. If you notice, it was really warm. I just kind of embraced the practicals that were presented. And by practical, I mean, these are lights that already are presented to you. You can change the color of them, but they're really just for the purpose of creating naturalism in the frame. So the lead protagonist, we kept it warm. A lot of the practicals were warm, like I said. And then on the other side of this street were actually cool practicals. And if you notice here's that, like, which we're going to get into with color theory, just in color schemes, but it's complementary. Blue and tungsten are commonly found in a lot of like Michael Bay movies, but his is a little bit more like garish, like, characters are really saturated, and we love throwing in cool practicals or having the color grade in itself be kind of cool. If you're like familiar with Michael Bay. I love a dark negative. In photography, we say negative, that is your raw image, or in film, it's the negative. It's when, your image doesn't even have color yet. And that's equivalent to like digital shooting log or shooting raw. You have all this information and then you bring color back into it. But I tend to like a darker negative. Shadows tell stories to me. I love the gradation of and the dramatization of what shadows can do. And I'm just showing you raw images, and because I just eventually want to get into a conversation about it too, about if anybody works, who's a director working with the cinematographer, how do you approach things as color, and how does color tell story for you through cinematography? Specifically for me, I tend to lean more towards what Marcel Rev. I use color to really express emotion. Sometimes it's okay, as you can see. So this film actually is titled Brothers. This was my thesis when I was in college. So this was shot with a C300 and some Rokinon lenses. This is my first film I've ever shot. So I keep this to also to remind myself of where I've come from, and this was heavily inspired at the time. I am a huge Moonlight fan. Moonlight is the film that got me into filmmaking. It's the reason why I'm a cinematographer. I was actually going to include James Laxton, who's the cinematographer for Moonlight, but I decided, to go with the three I did. His cinematography is incredible as well, if you ever look up his cinematography. And a lot of these images, once again, if you notice, the color is tungsten and cool. There's a palette that I shot called Sister for Sale, and I was a little bit more expressive with that palette. It was like green, it was magenta, and I think like cyan in there, and just a little bit about color theory, right? So this is in my Miller note. A cinematographer's job, which I feel like is really important once you learn color theory, it kind of opens your world to capturing images in a different way. You start to see whether it's flowers in a tree or the wall that's adjacent to a building in connection and it's blue, and you notice that your character is wearing orange. Things start to open up in a new way. And it's not just the exposure of the image, it's all of what you're capturing, right? Even the background is part of the palette. Anybody who's unfamiliar or with using color schemes, you can use color schemes to tell a story. So we have analogous. I would say in my own work here, I used an analogous color scheme, more so starting off there. It's all on the same side of the color wheel, which lies right here, right? And then just going back to Marcel Rev's work, I'm inspired by the way lighting, even when it's not pretty, right? Because lighting can be a little ugly. It can be whatever you want it to be, but it's about what tells the story in the moment. Sometimes it's not about getting perfect exposure because the character is breaking down. So maybe the lighting reflects that, right? Or if everything is going great in this character's world, you have, what we say, even lighting across, there's really no shadows. What I love about Euphoria is that it is a drama, coming of age teen drama, and that the lighting is so expressive because going through our adolescence, you're going through so many emotions. And I think that Marcel Reb did a great job approaching that with his color theory. And once again, I love this shot right here. I just wanted to talk about this because I love how he uses floral in the background. It's actually a reference to painting as well. And we'll talk about, like how you can find inspiration as a storyteller, whether you're a director, whether you're a cinematographer, editor.
Can you talk, since you're talking color, I think a lot of directors struggle with how to know what they're working with. Like you sound like you work with deciding what colors you want to go with before you film. Some people wait until the end and just do color. How do directors make that decision with their cinematographer and their colorist?
Thank you for that question, Jen, because I was going to open or ask a question about that in regards to all directors who are on. Any questions about how do you, whether that's through the pre-production phase, conception phase, when working with cinematographer, any questions in regards to how do you approach that? Like, questions you can ask. I know specifically for me, and I'll just give an example. When I first get a script, I try not to attach too much to it visually. I just try to read it and get acclimated with the characters. I think, characters fall into archetypes, and once you should learn the personality, the downfalls, everything of a character. And once I get an idea of, okay, how this particular character is going to be captured. And then I get curious about the emotional arc, right? So a character can be an innocent character and starts off in white, but something happens along the way, right? Just like any villain in a movie. And then they transition to darker tones. So I usually talk to a director and ask, what is the emotional arc of this character? Because just like us every day, we evolve. Right? We evolve. My favorite color right now in my life is green. And for my whole life, it was blue. I can't tell you why I can tell you why it's green. Maybe it's because I'm feeling more in touch with who I am, the earth, things around me. But now I'm obsessed with palettes of green. And even in my work, it's starting to find its way in there. I'm from Florida. So cyan tends to be a very comforting color for me. When, and then also when working with a director about color, I tend to ask what colors speak to them, as well. Once again, we all have an origin of where we come from, and certain colors just mean something to us. But yeah, if anybody is curious about asking if, you're a director and need advice on how you approach color, or just any questions regarding color theory, definitely open to any questions if anybody has one. Like I said, it's a conversation. I think
one of the reasons a lot of people have probably shown up here, especially directors, since there's a lot of directors on, is choosing shots. Because I think as a director, you're often going, I know I need to get a close-up and the coverage of the hand holding the pen, but having the know-how to move the camera or to frame, you're talking about what's her face from Handmaid's Tale, just making bold choices. I think that they would love to hear how you make these decisions as a cinematographer and how you help your director make these decisions.
Thank you for that, Jen. So once again, pointing my camera at the story, and I'll show an example of that specifically in my own work. Let's see. So I'll say this I'm actually going to take you all to a documentary that I photographed called Before We Had Insomnia. And the director's name is Elise. Really great director. So in talking with him, the visual language that we designed, he wanted a lot of central framing, right? And in cinematography, you have what's called our rule of thirds. If you were to draw 2 lines down the frame and 2 lines across, whether it's left thirds, right thirds, or central framing, they're all saying something different. Left, putting a character on one side tends to leave dead space, which kind of, makes you feel like the character is a little lonely. Central framing, we talked about, he said, I really want the focus to be on the subjects, on these people who are talking. They had voiceover under this documentary, just talking about anxiety, dealing with depression. We also wanted, using cinematography for texture. I love using macro lenses, as you can see in this shot right here. Can't remember what I shot with, probably an 85, but filling the frame with texture. And as you're going on, like I said, my work is intimate. So that's also an important thing, I guess, just to note as well to what Jen said, making these bold decisions. It's really important to also look at a cinematographer's portfolio and ask yourself, does the photography align with this particular story I'm trying to tell? When Elise looked at my reel, there was an intimacy he really knew he wanted. I love verite, which is just another word for like shoulder. It's from the French New Wave era. And a lot of these shots were actually captured on shoulder. One, I feel like there is a freedom to the camera being able to move. I feel like there's situations where the camera should be locked off and shouldn't move because that's also saying something. In these particular shots, once again, I point my camera at the story while making sure that I'm also collaborating with the editor. So I asked the director, like pacing, are there going to be shots in between like supporting footage? And that's why like knowing the script is really important. Just knowing what, like for instance, this particular, this young lady right here, she was very like, she loved the flowers. That's something Elise wanted to capture. So as a cinematographer, knowing my shots, knowing you have your standards, you have your close-up, you have your medium close-up, medium, you have your full shot, which you're seeing the whole body, and then you have your wides, right? I tend to, just to create more, I always mispronounce this word, but dynamicism or just to make the image, the edit more dynamic. I tend to, and I talk with the director about this, I tend to skip a shot. When making a shot list, I don't get married to, okay, well, we need your standard medium to medium close-up to extreme close-up, right? For the reason, because usually of time constraints and budget. So you're, especially in the independent field, like a lot of the times you're on a shorter shooting schedule, so you can only grab what matters. So I tend to, like, if I I'll talk to the director and I'll tell him, well, we got that on a medium. Let's go a close up, right? Because you can skip that MCU, especially like in narrative, if something's already planned out or something emotion is starting to increase in the scene. I'll let the director know. I was like, well, you have this on a medium. I would go close up for this, right? So when the editor cuts to it, you can feel that. There's not much of a difference between a medium and an MCU. There is, but there's not, you know what I'm saying? I've learned just through a lot of shooting when we would create these substantial shot lists, and it would be substantial, like, all right, we're going to go for it, get all these shots. And then you get to the editing room and a lot of these shots fall to the editing floor, meaning, you didn't end up using them. It's great to have those options because you just never know when that photograph is going to get used, that shot's going to get used. But most of the time, I like to go in with the director with a clear vision. Once again, just because time constraints are always, we only have a location for a day. So we got to make sure we get exactly what matters. Here, we actually shot at Stone Mountain. This is in Georgia. And the reoccurring theme, I love backlighting, once again, central framing. A lot of these characters, we have like portraiture of these characters, a hand in the middle. He wanted to get a little experimental, which I love. I love the director who, wants to really use the frame coming down from the top and as the day, went on and the sun was setting, we really wanted to go for a silhouetted, shot. So just going back to what Jen said, as well to any director, just wanting to know how I'll look at references of films. I tend to ask the director, I said, hey, create a shopping list of frames that inspire you. I think imitation is flattery. Sometimes I just straight up try to go for exactly what I see another cinematographer accomplish. For instance, since we're talking about composition, I'm going to take you all to Reed Morano. She is just a brilliant cinematographer, and I'm choosing her work specifically for cinematography, for composition. The way she composes the way she frames characters, it's very intimate. There's a vulnerability. She tends to shoot dramas. Once again, if you notice a similar style of lighting, like Marcel Rev, there's shadows, color theory. You see a little bit of orange peeking through here with this blue overall tonally. It's a blue image, but you have a different color temperature to break the image up. And once again, it's, putting these characters or putting you right in the story with the like in the character, putting them central frame allows us to just focus on this protagonist and what's happening and where they're going. In another class, which, this class was really to, talk about the topic of cinematography. And at the end, if there's anything specific that, whether it's how to choose lenses, all these different things, like I said, even more so working with a cinematographer, I'd be open to doing more classes to dive in depth and be able to really take a whole class and just talk about color and compare different films, maybe even see frames from a few films that you all have shot and discuss what was going on, like what you were going for and what you plan to do on your next film. So Read is, I just think compositionally putting a character off to the left frame, it does a few things. One, we don't know what this character is looking at, right? And I'd assume the next shot after this is going to give us a POV of what, she is looking at, but it's also guiding your eye in the frame, right? If she were central framing, there wouldn't be this almost ominous feeling of like what she's looking at on the right. And that's what I talk about, like a cinematographer's job is to tell a story, but in a very understated way, right? We don't want to just spoon feed the audience, but we want to do a seamless job at taking people on a ride and not knowing where they're going, right? And the camera's just kind of being a guiding hand. And what I mean by that too, as a guiding hand, I have an example. I love the film Moonlight, like I told you all, right? I just want you all to see this opening sequence. This is photographed by James Laxton, who works closely with Barry Jenkins. They've done Moonlight together. They've done If Beale Street Could Talk. They've done Underground Railroad. They met each other at Florida State, went to school together, and they've been working together ever since. And in this opening sequence, we see Juan, who gets out of the car, and through the camera movement, you not only get the geographical location of where the story is happening, you also understand the hierarchy of the characters and how the camera moves, right? I love this because we become an active participant in the film. The frame is moving, we're moving with the frame. We know that the film is moving forward, things are happening, life is happening, right? But if anybody is familiar, with Moonlight, the opening sequence is on Steadicam, and Juan gets out the car. He walks over to one of his homeboys, one of the local, one of the neighborhood drug dealers, and Juan is the top dog, and it's like a beautiful dance that the Steadicam operator goes from around these, characters, revealing it's what we would say, it's a one take. There's no cuts. The camera's just floating, introducing new characters. There's a man who comes into frame, trying to see about a purchase. The camera pans over to Juan. It's just like constantly moving. And I'm more than positive, right? Decisions like that are made in pre-production. So, when I work with a director, I always ask, in this moment in particular, do you want to cut or do you want this to be a one take? Allows us to stay in the moment. Cutting allows you to breathe. Sometimes, to tell the story, you don't want the focus to cut to anybody else. You just want to keep that tension. It's the closest thing to real life when there's no cuts, right? As a cinematographer, Laura said that she has a Pinterest and she'll look up film looks, spaces, or colors, or light. And that's starting the conversation right there. I tend to reference a lot of paintings nowadays myself. What I would do is when working with...
I like everything you said so far. I notice working with each director is different. So sometimes I've noticed that some directors like to have more control over what I do as a DP, my style, me picking. So it's more so I try to develop the relationship with the director, learn how he or she directs, and then move there, because everyone, like sometimes you have directors who are so locked in, they know exactly what they want, where you just have to go along for the ride and just help the vision be seen. But then there's other times you have the agency to actually create and make suggestions. So it can fluctuate for sure.
Yeah, Josh, just to like piggyback off of that, you're 100% right. I get into the psyche of a director. I know after doing a few lens tests that, you really like an 85 for coverage. You really like that 85 because you can tell how excited it makes them. It's like, oh yeah, that's the shot. I think there's a dance that happens when a cinematographer is behind the viewfinder and the director is at the reference monitor, that you can feel that confidence that when a director, is excited and you can hear them, behind the monitor and you're, with the camera, that's a great feeling. That lets you know that obviously you're contributing because you can't help but see this story in a unique perspective, but you have found that alignment in the director's vision and how you photograph images. And now all of a sudden, like this amplified story, you become like two kids. It's like, all right, that's exactly what I want. I'm seeing it on screen. This is coming out in the way that I want it.
What are people using for mood boards these days? And look, Shot Deck, Pinterest, etc. So maybe just put in the comments some things that you guys use. I don't know, Timothy, if you have a specific.
I love Shot Deck. Shot Deck is almost pretty popular. What I'm doing nowadays is I got an SSD, and I'm starting to, after we do dailies for each film that I do or project, I'm starting to keep my own compilation of like images. So it's easier to go back and reference to something so I can kind of build when I'm building cinematography playbooks. I love Canva. I stay on Canva. Canva is usually where I do a lot of, I can even show an example of that as well. I think it'd be nice to show. So when I'm working with the director, and like I said, after I receive the images, I think it's really important that a cinematographer brings something to the table, right? Yes, our job is to aid in the overall vision that the director is guiding us towards. But I think it's great to also know that, or a person who also directs, just being vulnerable, it's whether you're doing a short film or a feature film, it's hard to know every single aspect of how, like what you want. There's so many parts moving. I consider myself an actor's director because I'm an actor as well. And then you have directors who are more so like from the technical, I know what frame to frame, like what I'm going for. I tend to really just lean into the performances. I'm going to share my screen. So this is a short film I did called The Gift and the Curse. And it was with this amazing 501c3 program called Black Girls Film Camp. It's an amazing program. They choose young girls across the country and they equip them with mentors. And they come with the story and they provide them with the resources to get these films shot. And I was fortunate to be a cinematographer for this film. And this is pretty much what I do for narrative projects. I compile I call them lookbooks or like, playbooks, like some people would say cinematography Bibles. And I'll just bring this to the director. Right. And I'll talk about point of view, and this is based on several conversations I've already had with the director as well. So this isn't just, well, here's how I see it. So I'm just going to present something new. I take what the director has talked about and I'm said, and I kind of plan something around that. This was about Melanie. It's about a young girl who ends up being able to hear, voices. I get technical optics. I talk about what camera we're going to use, provide like the lenses we're going to be using. What aspect ratio are we going to record this in? Everything's visual. So I try to provide as many visual examples as I can, objective points of view, subjective points of view. I try to include little notes about lighting. And once again, this is just to give us like when we get on set, we always say shooting a film is, it's going to war and everything that could happen will happen. And, you will not have that time, but you'd be surprised, especially nowadays over the past, like I would say, year and a half of my career, when I plan these, like when I go into the director and I do these books, we look back on the film and we laugh usually because we're like, it came out exactly. And most of the time, we didn't have the time to look back on the lookbook. We just looked at it and you just started making natural decisions because you already had a plan and you knew how we were going to execute, even down to like color palette. I provide, all of this when working with my director, just so we have, just a plan, how the camera's going to move. Here it was steady. She's, going down the hallway. I include the script in between. We'll place people and like all of these things, it doesn't have to be perfect. Like I said, I work out of Canva. I'll place these cameras in different places. I already know it's just me, but I've seen it before, but I always put down camera specs. I love to get on set and just kind of work without thinking about it. There's already so many decisions when I'm working with my gaffer, measuring light, all these different things that are happening. So doing all this prep allows me to just get into this flow when I'm on set where I can just create freely.
I was wondering from a director's perspective, just for the times you were working in a DP capacity for just different projects that you've done, the ones that have stood out the most that you felt like were the easiest to do, what was the language like between you and the director that you felt like you were receiving that clear communication to get you to where you guys were trying to go?
Oh man, that's a great question, Moja. So I would say I'm Fine is a short film that's about a couple that experiences a miscarriage. It's a film that's going to be making its domestic premiere at the Bronze Lens Film Festival this year. It's executive produced by Tyrese Gibson. And the director, her name is Alexandra X. Alex's last name. Laniqua, can you type it for me? I know when I say Laniqua, y'all, my wife is on here supporting me. So, but that question, we had a lot of meetings just like in pre-production. I think that's where you can really hash out a lot. We knew she wanted something dramatic. Because tonally the topic is dark. We wanted to go for a drama. And we just kept, discussing just feelings of how do we want the crowd to feel in this next frame, even down to the beginning of the film. I suggested, because we start off with already knowing that something's wrong. So I said, well, why don't we just do clean singles, right? You rarely ever see the husband and the wife in the same frame. Usually we'll do, when getting standard coverage, you can do it over the shoulder, you do a 2-shot, you're putting both protagonists in the frame. I said, well, to create this separation right now, let's just photograph them in single frames. And then when there's flashbacks of when times are happier, they're in the frame together, they're hugging each other. And every time it goes back to the actual like current life, they're always separate. Until the end of the film, you see, like we do this push in through the bathroom, right? That goes right into the bedroom. Matt, who's our lead protagonist, walks in and he gets on the bed and he breaks down to his wife. So up until that point, you hadn't really seen them together, only through flashbacks. So showing that was like the reconciliation of like this man saying that like, I'm not okay. I do need help. This does affect me a lot more than I'm making it seem. And then another film, I would say the Black Girls Film Camp film. It was really great, you know, working with a young director. She was really expressive. She knew exactly what she wanted. It was very cute. Her name is also Alex. She was like big on like Pinterest as well. She would just provide these images and she's very much like, I don't know how we're going to achieve this, but I just like the way it feels, you know? And that I think is what drives me as a cinematographer, is to find my way to that feeling that the director is going for. So I hope that answered the question.
But she's saying, what is a shot that feels like it's so important to this advance, may not get enough attention in pre-production?
Yeah, I definitely have an answer for that question. I'll say this. If it involves a car and the camera is moving, you got to plan out the route. I've done a few films where I'll tell the director, producers that, you know, like I said, in budget, independent filmmaking, you can't always go location scout. Sometimes you do just show up to a location and you have to light. And that's been some of the best training early on in my career where I didn't have time. I just had to walk in and figure it out. Nowadays, when it's something like a car moving, which like, and I'm fine, there's this car sequence, I'm pretty adamant about like, we have to go to the location. We need to know what time of day we're shooting this particular, are there any bumps in the road? Where I use an app called Sun Tracker, which I tend to track the sun all day. It's just part of my job. And knowing where the sun is going to be, are there going to be a lot of flashes of the sun in the car? Because that can really affect color in post, because once an image goes, you know, there's high exposure and you can't bring information back, you know, in an like overexposed image, even with, you know, the advancement of modern technology, it's hard to like, you know, grab that information. So there's a lot of planning that goes into that, I would say, or any sequence where the camera is going to be, let's say, like, you know, like I was saying earlier, the one shot. I wish I could have shown it from Moonlight, but anytime it's a one take, yeah, it has to be, you know, discussed in pre-production, because the actors have to be on point. The cinematographer has to be on point. There's timing involved. It pretty much becomes theater, right? I come from a theater background, and you know how much rehearsal you need for theater. So I would say shots like that really need to be discussed. When you pull them off, they're incredible. You can definitely find yourself. And they also, if you're fighting time, they can save a lot of time. If it's not planned out, it can end up soaking up a lot of your time in production. You can find yourself behind on production and having to compromise shots. I
would say one of the hardest things that directors, especially women directors, deal with is cinematographers who don't know how to be cinematographers. They're basically want to be directors. I don't think that's you. It sounds like you're very collaborative. But do you have advice for directors when it comes to working with cinematographers who basically push back, who aren't giving them what they want because they want to do it, you know, the cinematographer wants to do what they want? I found this a lot on sets where I'm working with men DPs. So any thoughts on that and how to best handle those communications?
First of all, great topic. I have a colleague that I talk to, and I ask her all the time, just recently, about how is it when you're working with male directors, or just you being a woman and, you know, being the cinematographer. And I'll answer that question for both the director who has worked with the cinematographer. Unfortunately, it didn't provide that safe space for you, and then vice versa for a cinematographer who worked with the director. I would say as an artist, I'm learning to, in every day, but take up space, right? That's the first thing. Be confident in your vision and know that, you know this story better than anybody, especially if you're the director, right? You know, even if you don't have that confidence, know that you were put in this position to tell this story. It's important to, I'm huge on this. Before we shoot, I constantly talk about creating safe spaces for artists. At the end of the day, no matter what discipline, we're all artists. we all want to contribute. I don't believe in hierarchy. We have this above the line and below the line kind of thing. I feel like a great idea can come from any department. I have seen brilliant ideas come from the costume design that it made the film because we saw this connection between characters. A film would be nothing without sound. So I feel like just before we say, camera speeding, sound speeding, how you give that same respect to make sure sound is I love checking in with the director, especially after the take to ask, is that what you wanted? There's so many people looking at a director, and I've directed a few things myself, but it takes so much education. And I have such an empathy for directors because everybody's looking at you as if like, all right, you have the answer. And after we say cut, you're like, that was it, right? And the cinematographer becomes the director's outside of the first AD to keep us on track. But that's your best friend. It's like, okay, you have my back here. If you need to go for another one, let me know. We can go for another one. I'm big on, I don't want a director to get to post and not be happy with what they got because they felt like the cinematographer was like, I got it on the medium, I got it on this. That's kind of all you need. Just give it to the editor. They'll put this together. You'll be fine. I think it's important to, like, just in the same way they should support a cinematographer and know that a cinematographer is not just a camera person. They're a visual artist. They have positioned this camera, know how to move the camera in a way that they put themselves in the film. I like to operate. I know in America, we have unions, we have camera operators, and the director of photography tends to be behind the director's monitor. It doesn't make sense to me telling the film unless I'm actually operating the camera. I like to get my hands dirty, and I feel like that I'm able to be intuitive with the director, knowing exactly what they want if I can move the camera myself, like through, conversation. And yeah, and then and then on the specific topic of that, I'm constantly always making sure when I'm on sets, like one, let's just talk about the inclusivity of making sure. I personally don't like being on sets that have more men than women. I always feel that, when I get into pre-production and I'm realizing that it's a team full of men, I always tell myself, I was like, I know for a fact there are positions or I know talented artists that should have filled this position that just doesn't need to be a man a lot of the times. I'm really big on making sure when I'm on set, especially, the camera department, I know we have our different departments, but it's really important to listen. It's really important to understand the history of filmmaking, the history of our country and like where we're coming from. And as a man, like not to be all uprighteous, but I know there's a responsibility that I hold in that and making sure just like I appreciate being able to be seen as, a Black man, holding the camera. I think that's really important. So I think it's just as important to support a woman cinematographer who's shooting, because at the end of the day, I'm a minority, but women cinematographers are more of a minority. And I love being able to open doors. And once again, I'm always going to say it, create that safe space.
I really want to just applaud you for that, for like having that awareness that it's like dudes have to help women come up. Just like I always say, white dudes have to help everybody else come up. And then they just either they aren't or they are, I
just had a question specific to like coloring and like a colorist. And just also because you had mentioned it earlier about you used paintings as a reference, and just wondering like your archives, like where are you pulling from and things of that nature. And then for color, is there anything you ever wish that is considered in pre-production for color when it happens with the colorist in post? Or is there anything that you ever wish is like communicated to the colorist once it's all said and done?
Yeah. So I am a colorist, right? I would say that kind of developed because when I first got into being a cinematographer, I really didn't know how to work with a colorist. So I had to work to achieve the image that I was going for, which took me on the path of becoming a colorist, taking classes, getting certified, and just taking it back to pre-production. I think the most important phase of filmmaking is pre-production. Production, I call it the show. It's like the moving show. Everybody comes to set, and from swag to shooting to everything. And then post-production is putting the puzzle together. And, God bless people in post-production, the editors. But I love bringing in the colorists in pre-production if I'm not the person coloring the film. When everybody's on the page in pre-production, you know what you're going for tonally. It creates for such a seamless artistic process. I shoot raw on a Sony FX6 or like Arri Alexa, something like that. But I tend to pretty much get what we're going to get in camera. I'm very much an in camera. It's like when shooting on film, I'm shooting on a film stock. You're going to like what you get out of the camera is what you're going to get, right? It's not going to give you too much room in post-production to like shift the color this way or that way. I tend to If, for instance, Moja, if you really wanted hints of magenta in the frame, I'd put that color in the frame. I feel like there's great coloring software, but I feel like once you get to the point of trying to split tone too many colors into a frame, it starts to look unnatural. And there's only so much that post-production technology can do. So it's just really important to, like, when discussing palettes and making sure, and this is just connecting back to Jen's question too, the interview you have with your cinematographer is so important. Pretty much treat it like you were going out on a date with this person. And it's like, if you feel like after 5 or 10 minutes, the conversation, it's like you haven't even talked about your film, you're just talking about film, then you're probably headed down the right path. Somebody who, because whether you have a 10-day shoot or a 2-day shoot, you got to spend so much time with this person. So when I'm even, interviewing with the director, I'm very big on just conversation. Who are you? Who am I? Why we both love movies? Once you get those commonalities and you understand, like, you have a confidence and a cinematographer who's just willing to fight for your vision, I think that's going to be a good duo at the end of the day. Even if you both don't have the answer, I think it's that relationship and that bond that's going to push each other to figure it out.
And on the flip side, very early on in prep, the more you prep, the more you'll know, is this person the right fit? And especially ladies, trust your gut. Your gut will tell you, I should fire this person now. It doesn't matter how much you like them as a human. If you're not working well, you've got to part before you get to set, because if you're feeling it in prep, it's going to be worse on set. So could you give us one last happy, positive?
Although I'm a cinematographer, I'm big on writing. So I say write every day. Get out thoughts, create even when nobody's looking. It's such I've gone through such a metamorphosis as a cinematographer. I used to try to get this, like, the most beautiful image I could. And I love a beautiful image, but I find myself now, I'm so obsessed with story. My biggest advice, whether you're a director, editor, cinematographer, know story until you're able to use the principles of story at will to create violently. I read that somewhere. Like, no story like the back of your hand, no archetype, no emotional arcs, characters evolving and changing. Everything else becomes just an attribute. You're just aiding in the story. But I would just say, above all else, we're all storytellers. Tell stories that shake up the world, tell stories that change you specifically. There's a really great director on here. His name is Trey. I actually know him. And he wrote a film titled Emancipation. And it's a great film. And he approaches and addresses the theme of toxic masculinity. And Trey is a director. I'm just touching on Trey because he touched on a story that specifically meant a lot to him and that affected him growing up. So always pull from where we come from, or like where you come from. That's how you're going to tell the most authentic and natural story. And yeah, I appreciate you all for just tuning in for this conversation.
Thank you for sharing your expertise. It gets easier. And thank you for leading the Orlando chapter. Those of you who are here who are in Orlando, we are coming to you. We're going to have a live event. So look out for the newsletter for when that is and get signed up.